Thank you, Paul, and Nick, and the Architectural League for making such a good decision this year. Actually, that's actually Sestol. Rem said that when he got the Pritzker, so I thought, well, if he did it. So I it's tough out to follow. So I'm going to try my best. I think I was just looking the work of Ben and Gaston is really about material moving towards tectonics and then it gets form. I think we operate in a complete different trajectory. We started the formal end of things and moved towards tectonics, and then arrived to material. And after that, we obviously get a kind of a certain sensibility and intuition towards material. So not any material does it for us. And I think it's this is just not to oppose or to say, one is better than the other, but it's definitely different. We cannot really build any IKEA furniture piece without following instructions on our own. But the work that you'll see is obviously done in collaboration. My partner, Georgina, couldn't be here for family reasons and a number of things. And it's definitely around around this thing, which is obviously one of those projects that takes a while, and it comprises the whole, your time for quite a bit, but also your energy and your mind. And so embedded is not just the title of our book, but it's also kind of our approach to the context of kind of being, not just practice, because in our case, this really has to do with opposites, to try and really ingrain ourselves in both the discipline and the field, the practice, the profession, and trying to have enough agility to be able to move between both, back and forth, to be able to produce a kind of a sort of feedback loop that allow us to constantly readjust ourselves in terms of what our ideas are and what we can feasibly execute, always leaving an amount of openness in terms of what our desires, what our interests are, and how the things begin to mutate. So what you'll see in the lecture is probably two, not extremes, but definitely two big lines of work. One that is being completed, one that is actually on the making and in the thinking, and obviously implies difference, implies a degree of mutation, and implies a degree of hopefully evolution. You'll be the judge. So ever since we started, we always aspire to a materialization of what we are doing, whether things are physical models, competitions, prototypes, or real buildings, meaning actual commissions by real clients. We always aspired to that architecture not necessarily had to be built, but it had to entail some degree of construction, some degree of constructibility, and it had to imply the level of technique, a level of tectonic makeup to it. Whether it's actually just a powder printer, or it's fiberglass, or it's a much more kind of a conventional material such as concrete or aluminum, these things had a level of tactility, and they had and they have their way to engaging the material world outside, let's say, the digital tools that produce them, which I'm less and less interested in discussing as content per se. So this was Paul's introduction, which is obviously a very interesting way to put it. So that mutates all the way from these sort of artifacts, prototypes, to the scale of buildings, to the scales of moments within these things that become tectonic in their own way. And they begin to move between different scales, different agendas, different projects, and sometimes different cities as well. That's actually far more beyond our control. And that, in retrospect, it begins to engender some kind of cohesion. Once, we'll hope, one idea in terms of how things are coming together, how things are amounting to a larger whole, which is your practice and your own way of seeing things, but it's not a subjective thing. It's supposedly amount to a particular content, no? And it's a content that again belongs to both, belongs to a certain research that usually goes on in academic work, which my partner and I are both involved, and also belong to the field of architecture. And there are obviously formal lineages around that, and formal families as well. The families in our own work, families of friends and colleagues and people around us, which we tend to associate or discuss things with. And this is a sort of a scientific autobiography to reference Aldo Rossi. It's not a subjective thing, but it's actually something that definitely goes on into it, and it will amount to something, hopefully. So formal lineages that we don't use anymore because of obvious reason that the works doesn't necessarily add up sometimes to the way we are trying to execute, the way the limits we find in the practice. Otherwise, that only partially exist, and ones such as this one that begin to emerge and move beyond the limits that we expected. There's also something really serial about this thing. There's something like doing and working in series, because although projects are unique, you also never know which one is going to get built, and the one that gets built takes 3 to 4 to 5 years sometimes. So these are longer periods of time, which basically ask you that you have to reconsider that and always look behind and maintain a certain level of obsessiveness to what you're doing, no? And that obsessiveness, the sort of multitasking, it's a little bit what we are kind of referring here, which we are definitely identify with. The idea that you have like just too many things and you don't know how you're doing the things, and they're like almost amounted to a kind of double life. Especially the picture with the kids, I'm like very much this it resonates in my mind, especially because my partner is with our 2 daughters at this point. But the idea that as an architect, especially as a young architect, you have to like try to insert yourself in a kind of profession, try to understand the material which you work with, and try to commit these sort of crimes, insert certain things that you're like no one really expects from you, no one really asks you to do, and you're anyway try to do it, and yet you also can't really enjoy, or you have to be somewhat silent about the effects, because these things you would like to confess at some point, but but these things are kind of go unnoticed, and the rest of the people don't really care about, and then you sort of do your work. It's important about this thing, about the sort of subversive nature of trying to put yourself into orbit and do these things and maintain a certain appearance, that you have to be a professional, and this is a service-oriented discipline in a certain way, especially when you actually have clients and they expect things from you. So all the work you're seeing has, it's actually relying on mechanisms of torsion, where surfaces are of a particular family, usually mutating from hyperbolic paraboloids all the way through saddle surface geometry. These are all surfaces that you can actually make and control through straight lines or straight edges. This has an effect on modeling, of course, but it has an effect on building. It has a certain economy that you can translate on site, whether the things are actually mechanically or computer generated, or whether they're actually made on site. The important thing is that they also activate certain conditions. They're not just about the formal effects they produce, but if the way we tend to use them is to actually activate and induce movement or dynamism in areas of adjacency, in areas of conflict, such as relation between the living room and a pool in a house in Argentina, where the client wanted a particular kind of a very static relation, almost a cliche relation between the sort of house and the pool and the outside and the landscape. And we try and produce a much more dynamic condition that will begin to activate and begin to suggest sort of more dynamics between both sort of public and private, and especially begin to mutate, in this almost a kind of a subtly inflect, in areas where the movement of the body, the movement of view begin to actually appear. And in this case, instead of producing a kind of continuous visual relation, we actually produce a sort of oblique relation by producing a physical continuity between the house and the pool. So I'm going to show 3 projects in more detail. This is a gallery we completed in 2009, We started this in 2006. It was one of those things that, you know, the project was done in a week. The client loved it. He wanted a store. We did he didn't know who would occupy it. We were supposed to only work on the envelope, and this is in a very unique part of Los Angeles. Is Sunset Strip. It's sort of iconic. You know, the Johnny Depp Viper Room is 2 blocks down, and so it's actually one of the 3 most expensive real estate markets for advertisement in the world. And my guess is, you know, Times Square or Shibuya had to be the others. I still don't believe that, but this is one of the myths of LA. So we did this in a week. We took it to the city. They love it. Then our client had like second thoughts, and they wanted just to make a box and to make a confession I never made before. But we told them, well, you know, we're not going to do a box for you if you want, because we were doing other things. We will draw it for you, but then you have to get another architect, you know, who will like take it and you know, just to, you know, out of sympathy. We did that. He insisted that I actually follow him to the city to show it. And then the guy who unfortunately died recently was a really powerful figure in the city of West Hollywood, got really mad and said, like, I'm gonna make your life impossible if you actually try and make this project now that I've seen this one. And if you do this one, you'll go, you know, pretty much ahead. The other one, I'm going to send you to planning commission and so on and so forth. So my client got really scared and so on. And you know, this is not the only reason we did this, but it's one of those situations where, like, say, well, you know, Jesus, you know, those 2 days I almost didn't sleep because I wasn't going to do it, and I never actually had to say no to anything, and that was going to be the first time. So luckily it didn't happen, and it became really an important project. So this is the context, this is the stuff you see, and it's very much sort of a automotive culture, image culture, not a lot of architecture, not a lot of interesting stuff to see in that area, a lot of images to see on buildings. And we were really kind of fighting against that. And so the intention was to try and produce an envelope that will not just be a facade, that will activate people's view towards the building, into the building, with the idea that this thing could be either a retail space or a gallery. And it will have to advertise its content. So the intention of opening the space up while also allowing for different oblique views towards the inside or outside the space, depending where you are. And the surfaces that will actually be programmed in order to do that was an important part. And as I said, it's a relatively simple envelope where the upper surface sort of torques up, opening up a kind of large window corner, and the lower actually torques down. They're called upper and lower helix, technically, in the project, allowing for a kind of, you know, allowing for a sort of different effect towards the entry. We were dealing with a building that was existing. It was an existing house that it was actually retrofitted and maxed out to become a store. So the footprint had to stay. And there was a structure already going on when we got the project. It was going to be this horrible sort of neo-Spanish revival thing that populates a lot of the strip. So we basically cleaned it up and said this has to be a simple box, and we will just work with the facade and mostly the interior. Originally, there was a stair in the project that actually had a kind of a reverberation of the facade, and unfortunately that didn't happen, but mostly the facade was really our main intention. We thought of this in metal early on, and it was impossible to build in metal. We couldn't define the person, and it was one of the things that the shader got metallic, you know, in the renderings, and it's like, why it had to be metal? We actually, you know, thought about it and said, I think, you know, we're interested in the plasticity of this. We had to really make it in plastic. We had made stuff in plastic before, but we were very distrustful of the fact that, you know, plastic in buildings has never really been used. So we were lucky to collaborate with Treeform in this, who were at that point were just started to work on the Alice Tooley hall with Tiller Scofidio and this sort of translucent wooden panel. So we saw what they were doing, and we were actually got interested in terms of like, but can you use this in a building? They say yes, we went for it, and everything kind of got started. So there were 2 prototypes among a few other tests that had to be done in order to actually deal not only with the aesthetic aspects of this, which ultimately we envisioned this being very close to a car, to actually put this thing and ingrain itself, within the culture. But what was interesting is that we got to customize this 3/8 of an inch envelope. It's the first time this actually being used because it's in the facade of a building, at least, where this thing had to be not only the envelope, the rain screen, but the kind of a climate barrier, and had to deal with all these issues. So we had to customize the batch of this, which is made in unique extrusions, where from liquid thing they basically produce the batches, and basically we got to customize the translucency of it, because we wanted to have to play with the sort of dual life of the building behaving opaque or translucent at night and glowy when lit from behind. And these things are thin enough that had to be grabbed from below. They couldn't just be point connected from behind, so we had to come up with these mullions, which are pretty conventional in my view, but they extruded along these lines, and then with the sort of swerving lines that we were interested in making, produce a complete different condition. So these are the panels when they just came out. There's sort of microparticles of metal, embedded within the resin of the material that make the thing behave metallic. So it's you have a sort of duality of a material that is one thing and behaves like another, very much like plastic does. So, all the rationalization, like this took like a year and a half, going back and forth of where to put the seams and all that, because there are all these limitations, and I'm not going to bore you with, in order to get something that you want, and it still it fits within budget and so on, and to produce an image like this, which is the closest we can to a car. The material is actually glossy all the way until actually approaches the ground. We thought that would prevent skaters from using it, or will at least offer more resistance to it. But there's a funny video on YouTube that shows the opposite, and now we're like trying to, this became one of the places for skating. And so you have to hear what the contractor, even if it's a bad guy, tells you early on. So anyway, these are photos that I actually like a lot, because it shows this thing very much in context, with either corporate culture, car culture, even the advertisement and so on. And it's actually a recent exhibition of a Japanese photographer, Araki, displaying the work there, and the intention was that you could actually be able to see this thing from outside. So I tried in an area of town that you have like no precedent for art, no real lot of precedent for art culture. There's music culture, and this thing is kind of carving a niche for it, and all sorts of graphic and advertising. But the intention was that it would be something that it would be both like completely fitting to the context, and sort of fast-paced, that you could see really in a second, but also something that would be kind of unique, which made a lot of the artists and the curators a little bit nervous, because it's not the regular thing to have that, unless it's a museum. It's not the most regular thing to have a kind of iconic, quote-unquote, piece on your facade. So there's aluminum extrusions grab the panels, and the panels torque up. There's only an area of double curvature, which is in the incongruence of the horizontal gills that were supposed to allow you to actually take a peek down or up, and the tilted surfaces. Something like 50% of this was actually heat form over MDF molds, and the rest actually of the panels. And in many cases, the heat form, and this is the interesting of the saddle surface or the soft hyperbolic paraboloids, that you could actually force the panels into shapes that they are not, in order to reutilize panels. So this, although the shape in the geometry of your mold things are unique, in the materiality of it, you could always get around forcing them in shape. And no matter how truthful to the digital model you are, these things always had to be actually put into shape. And the fact that this thing is actually this thick made the process of putting these things together actually a little bit scary for me, because the people in the construction business are not accustomed to this level of fragility, and I'm myself also a little bit like, at least afraid in terms of how these things will age. Obviously, we pass all the tests and so on, and the Title 24 and all these things, which are actually become a world if you're not careful. So these things sort of like lights up at night, and the color changes, and it captures the light in very, very different way, which is actually kind of interesting. And then you begin to see a little bit of the backlight when the gallery turns up at night. And again, these are other series of photos. And then the inside is this, which was kind of an exercise on constraint and minimalism, which we actually were really interested in doing as well, to try and produce a kind of maximum contrast between what's going on outside and what has to be the world of a gallery, neutral, to allow for a bunch of artists to actually, exhibit their work. And then to look at a space, this is the upper level. There's a huge and enormous, amazing terrace where lots of parties, more akin to Hollywood parties than the real art gallery scene, which is actually kind of interesting and absurd at the same time. And the sort of the point of almost collision and assembly between, complete different worlds. This is something we're, more and more interested about. Not to make a collage out of architecture, but to actually find ways to seemingly integrate things that are unrelated, and also produce effectively contrast between them. There is a complete substructure that takes on this, which makes the back part actually, more industrial. So it's a complete different world than the front. And the kind of upper torque, they use this area a lot for actually advertisement and big sculptures or large screens at the edge. This is not a montage. Actually, Dexter was there, so I always use this picture, and people laugh when this. So there you go. Anyway, so yeah, small. So final project. This is a housing project in Argentina, which is a 10-story housing building, and it's under advanced stage of construction. It's in Rosario, which is a city Georgina and I come from, and that's a sort of downtown. It's a heavily built up downtown, and it's a place where we had made originally this project really early on, right at the end of when I finished school, and so this was the context we were dealing with. It's actually a context of our own work, 2 blocks from it, but also these kinds of context, which we did kind of a bit of research, because it's very much a developer-oriented context, like any housing project anywhere. The constraints are obviously different. It had to do with local markets and local demands and so on and so forth. So we sort of did our research to try and, we knew that we would ultimately be constrained towards the envelope, and we had to do something that, we wanted to do something that, it wasn't done, but it was sort of latent in many of the work. This is the context, which is a little bit different than this is adjacent to downtown, and our intention was really to bring back some sort of early ideas, or even classic ideas of how volume would begin to appear in the envelope. So the envelope is not just a surface, but it's a surface that can acquire volume. The code became so constrained that one could not really easily project outside, but we try and challenge it by working in a way that will allow these conditions to happen, that you will go from mass to projected volume to surface and completely dematerialize the building in the corner, allowing for views towards what's actually a very interesting street full of trees and so on, and also to place, this actually has 2 apartments per floor, to put all the living and sort of more social areas of this, what are actually relatively small apartments, in the corner, so it actually becomes a much more open area. There's 7 floors of apartments, 2 floors in the beginning, and then a duplex at the top. That allows that even playing with repetition, you can get away with tricking the kind of the effects of repetition, and then as these things actually comes down, there's a sort of a column branching that allows for the better reading of the plasticity of the surface and the liberation of the corner, which is otherwise a kind of big column jumping down. So this is the effects of the plan, an L-shaped partie that actually relatively simple, where everything is actually put on this envelope, which is again manifests itself as this sort of torquing pieces of volume, and then at the roof begins to actually move towards trying to integrate what otherwise is seen as a kind of addition on the water tank, which is again super mundane sort of problems, but these are the problems you're confronted with a project like this, where the space for work is actually relatively limited. So this is, we send back and forth all these drawings, and again the craftsmanship there is good, but it's not technologically oriented. So casting procedures and so on. The entire structure and envelope of the building in the front is actually made on cast inside concrete. And originally we envisioned seams, then we decided that seams will not be good, so we sort of went for a more plastic finish to it. And you know, some of the construction details in terms of how to produce porosity that aligns itself with some another set of holes that appear in repetitive balconies. This one is a more playful way. And also how to translate our knowledge of, in this case, fiberglass and composites into a mechanism for making this, where, let's say, ruled surface will finally become easier to make, and instead of like making them with wood, you make them the way you construct a model. And still you have to go there and show them, because no one will believe that these things are all straight lines. And so finally it happens, and it gets casted. So cement in Argentina is really, really sort of dark, and we really wanted a sort of white concrete. So we couldn't get white cement, and so we got white paint, and that's what you're getting. So I'm just gonna run through some of these pictures. This is actually the upper part where the sort of brise soleil on a kind of public area reaches the upper level. These are one of the parts on the south facade that actually gets more rain, and this is still under construction. These are two pictures, by the way. These are things that, when you're too much time in PowerPoint, you tend to do these weird things. And this is the back facade, which is also, it actually is brick infill on concrete structure, and it's going to take Venetian tiles, which are also white. So you'll get basically super white, super flat, 3 different materials in one. And we're like, we're in the front, we're actually playing with contrast. In this one, we're actually playing with, with a kind of flatness, at least in the kind of, in areas that are, off of fenestration. And so this is a recent picture of the corner view. And that's a kind of regular scene there. I love this because that's the sort of technology available. And those are the balconies right now. They're actually the windows are there right now. And where this thing kind of comes out, in front of the kitchen is a super tight, very small apartments of around like 60 square meters, for like a small, either young couples or students. And I don't know, so yeah, more photos of this. And the intention is that as this thing comes out, you will have areas inside the balcony that will begin to take on the only part of color of gray that will produce contrast with the balconies, which is actually the inside of the balcony with another gray tone of Venetian tiles. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.